Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today, Mayor Nirenberg. We're talking here in April. It's 12 years since your election to City Council District 8 in 2013, 8 years since your election to mayor in 2017. You've won races by narrow margins, by wide margins. You led the city during the COVID-19 pandemic. And, while you've been mayor, the city's budget has grown by over $1 billion. So there's a lot I want to talk to you about today. During your time as mayor of this city, the seventh largest in the country, talk about some of the biggest achievements as you see them during your time, some of the biggest challenges you think the city has faced during your tenure, and then we'll look forward a little bit into what you think is to come for San Antonio after you're gone. So I want to start with the light stuff. So, what are some of your, as you see them, your biggest achievements as mayor of San Antonio?
Yeah, well, thanks, Josh, and it's great to be here with TPR. It has been certainly a whirlwind 12 years, and 10 weeks or so away from, assuming there's a runoff, stepping off for the last time. A couple of weeks away from my 48th birthday, so there's a lot of nostalgia coming up over the next few months for me. But as I look back on my tenure in City Hall, what I am most proud of is that we have really refocused the priorities of this city and this organization and really the community at large, because everything that happens good in this community happens because of teamwork. We've refocused ourselves on addressing how to define economic prosperity in this city and ensuring that we are building a city that is prosperous, not just for some people, but for all people. And we're doing it through a systems approach to economic mobility and ending cycles of poverty, particularly in investments in human capital, workforce development and education, the whole spectrum, from early childhood learners all the way up to adult workers who have to re-enter the workforce. Of course, the foundation of economic security for any community and for a family is housing. And we have really solidified an affordable housing agenda in this city. And it has been resourced and it's been supported by the public. It's been modeled across the country. And another pillar, what I think is the third leg of the stool, is transportation reform. It's the second biggest burden for any household is the cost of transportation, and we're finally reforming our system of transportation, provide alternatives for people so they don't need a car to get around town, to and from work or to school or to recreate or do the things that they need to do to make ends meet. There are other aspects to it. Of course, I'm very proud that the city has underscored compassion as our foundational principle for how we create public policy. We've done that strategically, but also in recognition of the kind of community this already is. We've reached out to the world. We're an international city, and we've expanded our footprint in partnerships all across the world. And we've maintained our status as a welcoming community, one that embraces its true strength, which is diversity. And I think we've become a model for other cities nationally, especially in these turbulent times.
I want to talk about a couple of things that you just mentioned. One of them is housing and affordable housing.
Yeah.
It's been one of the cities and one of your top priorities in the last 8 years. You have the $1.2 billion housing bond, 2022. You have the strategic housing implementation plan. Could you talk a little bit about specific areas on the ground, how city policy has changed affordable housing in San Antonio?
Sure.
Areas where you think maybe the city has fallen short or not gotten to the place where you want it to be?
Yeah. Well, and it's always a work in progress, and we live in a dynamic environment, economically and otherwise. So we place these policies and plans in place, and they have to operate in a dynamic environment. When I came into office, we did not have a housing strategy in the city. In fact, it's something that Mayor Cisneros called for in the late 80s, and we never really accomplished the goal of creating a unified, comprehensive housing policy for the city. So I ran on that. We needed one. We needed to address the coming housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis that every community in the country is experiencing, perhaps globally. And so some of the main takeaways. First, I established the Mayor's Housing Policy Task Force, 5 diverse members of the community that represented different expertise and community voices. They were able to develop a policy framework, which we're now implementing through the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan. The key takeaways from that policy framework where, number one, we've got a myriad number of agencies, organizations, policy departments that are all involved in housing, and we need to align the system. We need to coordinate the housing ecosystem so we're all moving in the same direction with the same set of goals. And another takeaway was that we needed to address the issue of the housing cost burden. Wages were not rising nearly as fast as housing costs. That has started to equalize a little bit as we've raised wages in this town, and we've also tried to ensure a supply of housing. And so we found through the housing policy work about a burden on roughly 95,000 households that were cost burdened. In order to address those issues, we needed to do a number of policy changes, mainly to preserve the housing that we have, because the most affordable housing is the one we don't have to lose to disrepair, et cetera. And we have programs for that. And also we needed to facilitate the private sector that produces the vast majority of housing in our community. We can do that in different ways. For affordable housing, particularly deeply affordable housing that's not produced naturally by the market, we need to get involved in things like gap financing and being coordinated on tax credits that are usually state issued. We do that. But it also means cutting red tape. And for market rate or even housing above market rate, we need a whole range of housing, and we facilitate it different ways. We're not going to subsidize market rate housing. We're not going to subsidize luxury housing, but we can we can facilitate its production where it's needed by cutting unnecessary red tape. So we've tried to do that. Things like permitting of accessory dwelling units, reducing where we can the impact fees that create costs to ultimately consumers. So there's a lot of different things we're doing. I would say all of them have ultimately required coordination of the policymakers in city council and in other places, but also the support of the public. We asked the public in 2021, and this is all part of our plan, to change the charter to allow us to bond for housing, to do some of these things that require finances. They did it. The following year, we passed our first housing affordability bond. $150 million in that $1.2 billion bond program is now going towards things like gap financing, the building of permanent supportive housing, et cetera. The last thing I'll mention on housing, it was critically important that we look at housing as part of a spectrum that goes from economic mobility and security for a family, but also downrange homelessness. If people don't have the security of a roof over their heads, they suffer from myriad challenges. And so we also needed to connect our homeless services spectrum to the work that we're doing in housing. And as a result of that, we're finally addressing gaps in our homeless services. Permanent supportive housing is finally being built in this city very successfully. We are finding and supporting low barrier shelter for people who don't even qualify for permanent supportive housing because they are so functionally incapacitated. They can't take care of themselves alone. We have services attached to facilities specifically for that, to finally get a roof over their heads so they can begin to build back and ultimately, hopefully, get on their feet and in permanent housing and ultimately sustainable jobs and careers so they can be out of the homeless cycle forever. So it's complex. It's going to be a work in progress, but I'm very proud it's become a priority, and rightfully so. It's at the foundation of what we're trying to do to create an inclusive economy.
I wonder if you felt a tension or feel a tension now between that as a priority, and then, you have major development projects. I'm thinking obviously Project Marvel, which is not necessarily direct displacement, but could lead to rising property values that could price people out, or the Missions Ballpark, which is it's destroying, or it's resulting in the loss of not technically affordable housing, but low cost market rate housing. Do you think these things are in tension with the city's policy to support affordable housing, or how do you navigate that?
There is a tension there, absolutely. I don't at all deny the tension that exists, but we have to recognize that we need to do both things, be able to create economic opportunity and support economic development, but also address the needs for housing. And there are some important nuances into all the things that you mentioned. I would, for the Missions Ballpark, for instance, as a result, the outcome of that program is going to be the addition of housing, significant number of housing units that are only being brought to bear because of the facilitation of this project. The revenue that's coming in off of the economic development is going to be producing the housing. In fact, the housing is guaranteed before the economic development even starts. It is market rate housing, it's owned privately, and so the ability to do that is only presented when the public sector, us, gets involved with the overall project. But your point is very clear, and I agree with it. Whenever we do economic development, when we're investing in infrastructure, particularly in areas that have been underinvested in for a long time, we create property value change, and that's going to create a burden on the residents that are there. So part of the plan, part of the policy was that we had tools in place to address the impact, to mitigate the impact. I would love to have better cooperation from the state legislature, because we ultimately need to have alignment at all levels of government. The state legislature has a regressive system of taxation in Texas, and so we have tried and failed to get tax relief, property tax relief for legacy homeowners, for people who are burdened by costs, who have fixed income. They have not done that. But what we can do at the city is to do displacement assessments and use the tools that we have at the local level to try to address the rising property values. And we're doing that. We also provide, in some cases, alternatives for folks who have no choice because the rents are rising, because it's market rate and we can't control those. So, I think there is a tremendous amount of tension. I've never believed, though, that the solution to that tension was to not invest. We need to continue to improve neighborhoods, particularly those that have underinvested in, but we need to make sure that we're doing our proper assessments and using the tools that we have available to us as a public to support the public that is vulnerable to the costs rising. Upstream, though, from all of that is the work that we're doing to preserve housing, to improve incomes, to take care of seniors and other marginalized residents who are vulnerable because they're on fixed income. So all of this works together comprehensively, and I think the solution is we've got to be able to do all of it. And if we can't, then we're going to continue to be falling further and further behind.
So another one of the things that you mentioned, talking about some things that you've achieved, is on workforce development. I think obviously the biggest, most expansive example of that is Ready to Work, a program that you spearheaded, that received voter approval.
Yeah.
Since it started receiving applicants in 2022, it's been a little bit slow to start. There have been lots of critics, among the media, among the public about the program and its graduation rates, its placement rates. It's not currently on track. It seems to meet that goal of over 15,000 approved job placements by its sunset date. But I want to give you the chance to talk about the program. If you think some of these criticisms are off base, if they missed something about this program, what was your intention with Ready to Work, and what do you think it's becoming?
So I want to be clear on one thing. The program sunsets when the money is spent. The fact that we are not spending the money as fast as some predicted is more indicative of the challenge of poverty in this community to begin with. Ready to Work is designed to help people who are in the workforce, who are underemployed or perhaps unemployed, who need skills in order to get jobs that pay above poverty wage. And think about that for a minute. If someone is working a job that is paying a poverty wage, and there are far too many folks in that situation in our community, they're having to rely on public assistance just to make ends meet. But they're also having to work multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. That's the situation that we're trying to provide a solution for in this community. And the reason why this is important is that think about the children in that household who statistically are much less likely to achieve their own educational outcomes and therefore be able to live a life free of poverty. Their children, the grandchildren of the current generation, are even more likely, and the poverty expands exponentially. That's what they call the cycle of generational poverty. Ready to Work is designed to break that cycle. And in order to do that, we've got to get people in the front door. We've got to be able to reduce the barrier to even want to train, which sometimes requires childcare. And other times it requires some career counseling. It might require some housing assistance or transportation just to get to the training program. Sometimes it requires all of the above. Ready to Work is designed to help someone through that cycle, to ultimately break it and get back on their feet and be able to raise their children so the children have outcomes that are better. That's the work that we're doing. The cost of the program has not changed. In fact, it's much lower than we thought it would be. We're averaging about $6,000 per participant to get through. The amount of money that we will ultimately spend depends on how many people ultimately get through the program. And I will tell you, while it's not gone as fast as we initially predicted, the demand is there. We have had over 10,000 people enroll in the program who are currently training or have already graduated from the program. Over 3,000 people have already graduated. Over 2,000 of those, or roughly around 2,000, have already been placed in jobs. And the job placement, on average, takes 35 days. There are some cases that require a little bit longer. Some cases in some industries require a significant amount of time to do onboarding and things like that before someone is officially employed. But here's the picture of the participant and ultimately the job placement. The average participant, and I realize no one is average, but this is what the average profile of the participant in Ready to Work is a single mom of color raising children in a household that's with less than $14,000 income for the household. Imagine what that household is like, not just for the family, but for the children who are coming up in that family and what will happen. It requires assistance. Those are the folks that rely on things like nonprofits and the food bank just to keep food on the table. When we're successfully able to get that person, that mom, into the program and matriculated and placed into a job, she's now making $44,000 a year with benefits. So now that mom is able to get back home, maybe only working one job, be with the child or children. Their children are much more likely statistically to obtain a diploma and ultimately go beyond high school, which is required now to get a job that pays above a poverty wage. So the cycle of poverty now has been reversed. We are doing that for thousands of people in this community. And by the time the program funds run out, which is going to take longer than we initially thought, we will have trained tens of thousands of people in the city. Now imagine what will that do, that one person, just one household, generations after that, it will have an exponential impact on the children and grandchildren. Now imagine if we can do it for 100 people. That's massive change for just this area after a few generations. 1,000 people, 10,000 people, we're talking about transformation in terms of our overall trajectory of poverty. So I'm proud of this program. It is much harder than any of us thought it would be, but breaking the cycle of poverty requires us to have faith that we can help people in this community reach their full potential. I will tell you that $6,000 per participant, which is what the average spend is when they're placed into a job, is well worth the money if we break the cycle of poverty. And if we don't, if we're not willing to try, then we should stop talking about poverty because it's insincere. I'm proud that the city, through housing, through educational workforce development, through the other things like transportation reform, is finally aligned around ending cycles of poverty. And the proof is in the pudding. It takes an enormous effort, and there's so many different things that are involved in breaking poverty. But overall, we're seeing the needle move in the right direction. Between 2017 and 2022, compared to the decade prior, poverty in San Antonio declined by 3%. In the same report, which is from the Brookings Metro Report, we were #1 in geographic inclusion, meaning that whether you're in 78207, which has been one of the poorest zip codes in the country, or 782, and I forget which one, but there's most affluent zip codes in the country, in this city as well. whether in one of the or the other, the fact that we're leading in geographic inclusion means the quality of service from public safety to libraries to everything else is equal. We're achieving equity in terms of the service delivery in the city. We're also among the best cities in the nation in terms of narrowing the income gap in this city, which has been enormous. So the measures are starting to move in the right direction. It's taking effort, and it comes with its fair share of criticism because these things don't move fast enough. They will never move fast enough. But I have faith that we are now on the right track, and ready to work is one of the reasons why.
And I hope we can get back to that a little bit, but there are other things I want to get to in our conversation. And one of those is that one of the big issues that you campaigned on in your first race against Mayor Ivy Taylor was about ethics and accountability at City Hall. And I wonder how you think that has changed under your tenure. There have been a series of censures of ethics reviewed board hearings of council members just in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
You think that's evidence that the system is working better than it was, or that our current system doesn't have enough teeth, as you once pointed out? Well,
I still think our current system doesn't have enough teeth. I have always been a proponent of an independent ethics authority for the city because the ERB right now is appointed by the city council. So they're basically appointing the same umpires that call ball and strikes for the plays that they're in. So I've always believed in an independence of the ethics authority, and the only way we can do that is through charter change. It wasn't supported in this round or previous rounds. It has concerned me every time we have something that rises to the level of requiring city council to deliberate a censure. But I will say that we have maintained our standards of ethics and integrity at the city. So, in terms of when bad things happen, we're going to respond. You want to have measures in place that show the public that we hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards. I have not agreed with every decision that the council has made, but I believe I've voted my conscience and I voted what's right to maintain that standard in our city, and I will continue to do that. I think the city does need to, can do some things in terms of its overall structure of governance to improve it. But I'm glad that we have taken action when we have been required to do so in order to maintain the public trust.
In the past couple of years, one of the biggest issues for the public, it seems, or that's received a lot of media attention, but also a lot of public outcry, has been the problem of stray dogs and dog attacks. Obviously there are several fatal maulings, several non-fatal but still seriously injuring maulings by dogs across the city. How do you think the city has responded to that? Obviously, I don't think anyone expects the city to be able to solve this in a night or in a month.
Sure.
But do you think the city right now is on track to be in a place to solve this, or are future tweaks needed in order to get to a place where these aren't happening anymore?
Future adjustments will be needed. And it has dismayed me, like everyone else, horrified us to see some of these violent maulings. I think we are moving in the right direction. I think we are beginning to show the right level of urgency, but there are more things that we need to do. Look, I don't blame ACS for every externality that has caused the rise in the stray population or the maulings themselves. This whole country saw an uptick after the pandemic, and people discarding pets, things like that. We've had the problem exacerbated because it's been historic for San Antonio. But we need to do a much better job in spay-neuter policies. We need to be more aggressive. We need to offer more resources, which it requires resources to do. So I do think there's improvements. I'm hopeful that Mr. Gary will, he is hearing our sense of urgency, is going to continue to bring innovations to council. I know there are some council members who are laser focused on this issue and have increased enforcement activities, et cetera. I think all those are measures that we will take, or that we can continue to take to improve things, but we won't be satisfied so long as there's, continued stray dogs, people who fear being on the street because of stray dogs, or certainly maulings in the city. And it's not just the city, mind you, It's happening in an unincorporated area. It's happening in other cities, other communities. We need a better coordinated system as well, and that's where I go back to. We need to have government entities at all levels aligned on our big priorities, and this is one of them.
But one thing I did want to ask about is, any city government is going to face protests.
Yeah.
There's been protests all around this country in
Sure.
past 5 years, particularly. One of the biggest and most sustained ones that San Antonio has faced was the Black Lives Matter protest after George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis in 2020. I wanted to know, if you could reflect on the city and SAPD's response to those protests themselves, like at the time, the actual nights of the protests,
Yeah.
that sometimes turned to clashes.
Yeah.
And then how the city and SAPD changed or didn't change, as a result afterwards. I know there were
Yeah.
policies that were pushed forward to change SAPD. How do you think that has changed
Yeah.
SAPD and the city's approach to that kind of issue?
Well, that was an extremely challenging period of time for the whole country, and certainly for our city. When George Floyd was murdered and the protests began and really created what was a racial reckoning, a reawakening of some of the things that we had not dealt with for any time. There was immediately some unrest in our community, which no one had seen before. And I remember there was a couple incidents in the first couple of nights where police deployed non-lethal weapons, and in some cases injured journalists, and injured other bystanders. So I had some discussions with the chief immediately after that, and we agreed that escalating protests and creating more distrust between the community that was out there and the police that were there was not helping. And so they changed some tactics, one of which was the non-deployment of lethal weapons only under the direction of the chief himself. So more accountability for the use of those kinds of devices.
So I think you said non-deployment of lethal weapons. Did you mean
Correct.
deployment of non-lethal weapons?
So they agree. So the chief said, under no circumstances would non-lethal be deployed to disperse a crowd unless the instructions to do that were given by him. At the time, you had frontline folks who were there on site that could make that call, but he wanted to instill a greater sense of accountability to the public under those circumstances. I think that was helpful. After the first few nights of the protests, the tenor changed a little bit and was more forward-looking, and began to be about how can we were about to go into a police collective bargaining, and as you may remember, the previous bargaining, I didn't think met our standards financially or from a disciplinary standpoint. So we focused in at that point on addressing the disciplinary process to make sure that police officers who were fired didn't make their way back because of technicalities in terms of their records not being, viewable in a certain period of time, or just the strength of the arbitration versus the chief, who is ultimately accountable to the city manager and to the city council. So we changed all of those things. I think some of the tactics that were being used were changed as well in terms of response to violent incidents. At the same time, in the aftermath of that, we improved some of the policing strategy related to mental health calls and to providing alternative response mechanisms for police to respond to calls. So overall, the policing in this community got smarter and evolved through that process. It was extremely challenging because we saw things that we don't ever want to see from our city. But I think that after all of the protests ended, the community ended up in a better position. I think there are still a lot of things that are not addressed. There's still a lot of underlying concern and resentment, but I think we're in a better position now to address them when they arise.
So yeah, a couple of things I want to make sure we get to. One of them is Project Marvel. obviously be one of the biggest things that you leave city council, kind of like, yeah, here you go, guys, figure this one out, the next term. Obviously you've been a part of it, but you know, a lot of the specific details are going to be hammered out for the next council. You know, with a big caveat that you won't be the one seeing those details and voting on these things. You have been a proponent of the concept.
As is the nature of most great things. You don't get to do them all from start to finish, but I hear your point, yeah.
And so, you know, with that caveat that you won't see those things and be voting on them, you know, what is your thoughts on how the council and the next mayor should handle Project Marvel and all these multitudes of smaller developments and big developments like the Spurs downtown?
Absolutely, and I think you're capturing the complexity of it just in your question. You know, I'm a believer in Project Marvel, and Project Marvel, unfortunately, has taken on its own narrative because of some of the silence that and lack of details that we've had up until this point. But I will tell you, Project Marvel to me is a realization that downtown San Antonio needs to be a vibrant place for local residents to come to and enjoy, and shouldn't be viewed simply as a collection of projects that periodically happen and are mainly driven by the tourism industry. You know, when UTSA came to us and said they wanted to build a downtown campus, I was elated. But I also told Cheryl, look, we got to start thinking more comprehensively about downtown, because we got a lot of things going on. The Alamo project, you know, improvements along San Pedro Creek. We've got, you know, museums being restored, and now UTSA, which is going to totally change the nature of downtown into more of a residential community. So let's put all this together into more of a comprehensive district. And so flash forward, we now have some tools at our disposal to do this in a much more methodical way. We know that we have upcoming improvements that need to be made on specific anchors in downtown. The Alamo Dome is one, the convention center. We have an ongoing hemisphere redevelopment strategy going on. And we know that as a result of UTSA wanting a permanent place for ITC, we're gonna be dealing with the ITC, which I think is an extraordinarily important opportunity. And so amidst all this, with, you know, the AT&T Center, now the Frost Bank Center, nearing the end of its lease, building a sports and entertainment district in downtown San Antonio, or realizing one that also includes a discussion of what is the future for the San Antonio Spurs, naturally makes sense. Now, my advice for the next mayor and the council is to continue moving forward and thinking big. We will never achieve a prudent, community-focused, community-benefited sports and entertainment district with the Spurs in the heart of downtown that also finally makes good on the opportunities to bring the East Side the kind of development and economic opportunity that they have needed and wanted since the AT&T Center was first brought over there. We can do all that, I believe, if we have proper community input, we have alignment of the elected officials, and we move forward with those goals and principles in mind. And we spend our dollars prudently. There's a lot of infrastructure work, for instance, that's going to require the bulk of the public funds that would be available for a project like this. So it's achievable. Now, there's 101 different ways that people can say that this will go wrong, or why, you know, we shouldn't trust that, you know, stadium deals produce anything, or that the government should be trusted to usher something like this in. There's 101 reasons why we can not do something. But I will tell you this, the vision of Project Marvel and a revitalized East Side area that doesn't just say a stadium is good for the East Side, but brings things that their East Side communities want and need, improved public spaces, retail opportunities, neighborhood improvements. We can do those things if we dare to try. And so I'm a proponent of it. I believe we can, and I believe we should continue to move forward with community input and being prudent with our resources, with the Spurs, the San Antonio, the city and the county all together working on the same team, rowing in the same direction.
One of the issues that you may not have considered being a big job for mayor when you first ran was the issue of immigration.
Yeah.
Obviously, that I think very quickly became evident that that would be a big part of your job, and of the city's job.
I didn't know it was going to be, but yeah.
And that came with waves of migrants being dropped off at bus stops in the city, led to an expanding system of trying to figure out how to handle this with nonprofits.
Right.
Could you reflect on how the city has dealt with immigration over the past 8 years?
Yeah.
How that approach has changed, and kind of where things are now. The MRC is now closed,
Right.
but now the city is in this fight with FEMA over reimbursement dollars. How have things changed?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And so first I said I did anticipate, because that was when the state was going through its first iteration of SB4. There were these continuing and building attacks on immigrant communities in red states all throughout the country, but particularly here in Texas. And so immigration was being made a culture war issue by state lawmakers as I was coming into office. We weren't anticipating the tremendous surges that we've seen. I mean, we've dealt with things like this before. We had our first drop-offs of migrants into our community when I was mayor under the Trump administration. In the middle of the night, busloads of migrants dropped in our city without any warning. At the time, the Mennonite Church and other faith community leaders stepped up and provided shelter. We worked together through the nonprofit community and through the city to stand up facilities that would help provide food, shelter, clothing, whatever folks needed to survive and to be treated humanely. I will say this, I am proud that consistently over time and strategically since I've been mayor, our response to any crisis like this is that first and foremost, we're going to treat people with respect and dignity, regardless of who they are. And when we had that first wave of drop-offs, we stood up an MRC in downtown at the bus depot to provide the health screenings and things that folks need. It was completely resourced by volunteers within the city and nonprofit community, and people donated food and the things that folks would need, toiletries, et cetera. Flash forward to where we have been over the last few years. We've had significant migrant flows as a result of international policy and war and violence in South America. A lot of factors leading into the migrant flows that we've seen over the last 6-7 years. The reason why the Migrant Resource Center was stood up is because the way so immigration law in the United States has not changed significantly since, in almost 35 years. We're still living under the same system of immigration. Not only that, the immigration facilities, the adjudication process is vastly under-resourced. So people who are here claiming asylum or who are here through other legal channels, regardless of whether they go through a checkpoint or not, are here under legal auspices because of the laws that are in place right now that Congress refuses to change. So we don't have control over who comes across, but we do have control over how we treat people who are here legally. And so we've chosen to do that in a compassionate, humane way. So throughout this process, that's what's guided us. And as the numbers went up, and we had people dropped off, and it was very decentralized, we had people wandering. And we needed a place where people could go to get those, to centralize the process of assistance, so people weren't strewn all over the city. That it was safer for them, it was safer and more orderly for us. And so that's why we stood up the MRC, because there was a need. And so as that need has dropped, because the numbers have declined, because some of the executive orders in the previous administration, and now because of some of the executive orders in this administration, as the need has declined, we have closed the MRC. But I will say this, no matter what happens in immigration, up to and including comprehensive immigration reform, which we needed and was actually available to us in the previous administration if Congress didn't deny it because of Trump's rhetoric. Up until that point, and even through that, our North Star for how we handle immigration in San Antonio, including migrants in San Antonio, is to treat people with compassion, number one, to maintain order, number two, and to protect public safety. We can do all those three things at the same time, and that's what we have done and we will continue to do.
And I also want to talk about the future. Obviously, your time is coming to a close here at San Antonio City Council. And I'm sure there are many things you could think of for this as an answer to this, but maybe it's one of the biggest challenges that you see the next San Antonio City Council and mayor facing, whether it be something local and organic or something that comes from the state legislature or the federal government.
Well, there's a lot, as you mentioned, and normally I would say things like, well, we've got to continue to accommodate the growth and improvements in infrastructure as we uplift the standard of living and, the ability for local families to thrive who are already here. But all those things that I would normally say are strained incredibly by the political environment that we're in. This city functions because we have teamwork, collaboration across the community, public sector, private sector, across party lines with different jurisdictions. A large part of the operations of the city rely on the work of nonprofits. They do the things that the city is not equipped to do, but it's important. We also work with our federal officials to ensure we have the resources that are rightfully ours, because there are our tax dollars that are sent to DC and come back to us in proportion. We rely on that cooperation to do things like housing and to provide for improvements to our airport or to our transit system. The chaos and malice that has been shown through the Trump administration actions that are starving local communities, cutting off funding for nonprofits and to local communities, that are wholesale cutting the workforce of incredible agencies that we rely on to protect public health or to just do the basic functions of survival in this country, are creating huge headwinds and uncertainty in the functioning of our local communities. And that is a crisis of dramatic proportions that will have to be dealt with by future leaders. Navigating that is going to be a challenge amidst the priorities of the city. And it's going to require some depth and experience. And I think it's also going to require a constant reminder that compassion is our grounding principle in how we handle the people in this community, all of our residents. And so, that to me is the greatest challenge, is the political environment we're in. And coupled with that is the fact that it's a divisive, polarized political environment as well. And the misinformation out there is so loud and overwhelming that it's hard to get information out that people need to have. So that's the biggest challenge. I do have faith that if there's a community in the country that will be able to navigate it because of the collaboration and the spirit of the city, we will. I have faith that we will. But to me, that's the greatest challenge that the next set of leaders in the city will face.
And speaking of this next set, you've made some endorsements in the council races.
Yeah.
Obviously not for mayor. Are you planning on endorsing for mayor either before May 3rd or during a potential unlikely runoff situation?
So I want to be a friend and help to the next mayor, whoever that is. I have also made it clear, though, that I don't plan to get involved in the race, at least until the runoff. There's several folks on that list who I think are working hard and are deserving of consideration. So I'm going to wait and see until the runoff, and may make some statements or not at that point. But I'm urging everyone to do their homework. There's a lot of candidates in the fields, including in the council, that deserve your consideration, and the stakes are very high.
And then very last thing, I think, I have to ask, what comes next for you? Maybe is it going to be the Texas legislature, some political nonprofit think tank, or maybe even, run for Congress against Chip Roy?
Yeah. I was not planning to have a political life when I was growing up. I have enjoyed the time I've been privileged to serve and to lead the city. I don't think I'm done with politics, but I'm not ready to make any decisions on that yet. The truth of the matter is I have fallen in love with public service. I do believe it's been a calling. And I enjoy solving problems. And Lord knows there's more of those being created than solved at the moment in our political spectrum. So I don't think I'm done, but I think you'll have to wait and see. I don't think you've heard the last of me, though.
And then maybe besides the next big job, whatever that might be, what comes the day after you step off the dais for the last time?
Actually, if I time it right, the day I step off the dais, I'm getting on a plane and going someplace where I can declutter my head and be in a position of thinking through long-term decisions again. But no, I'm hoping to take a little bit of time to decompress. The adrenaline level stays at 110% at all times in this job, and it's been that way for a long time. But I'm looking forward to spending some time with my family, but also spending some time with myself and some good books and a glass of wine on a beach somewhere.
Well, thank you so much again for your time, Mayor.
Thank you, Josh.